I think that we can all agree that Usopp in Water 7 and Enies Lobby, his character arc is one of the most amazing, enjoyable things in all of One Piece. His fight with Luffy, everything about Sogeking in Enies Lobby, Zoro's threat to leave the crew if Luffy simply accepts him back without an apology, and then of course the apology itself. There's so many layers to this that you can peel back and discuss. I loved the scene at the time, and I love it even more upon reread. There's always things that I feel like you can learn, on top of the initially great experience. But you know, it wouldn't be me, it wouldn't be my channel, it wouldn't be Joyboy Theories, unless I say something stupid that by the end of the video makes some sense. So the premise of this video is that we all know that Usopp apologized to Luffy. However, I think that Luffy should have apologized to Usopp just as much, if not more. Basically, Usopp was right. And if you want to know why I think that, strap yourselves in. Hey YouTube, Joyboy here. So this concept of apology was important in Enies Lobby in the end when they returned back to Water 7 because of Zoro, essentially. I think that Luffy didn't really require Usopp to say anything. I think Luffy really wanted to just let Usopp come back, throw it under the rug, and move on because Usopp was his friend. But Zoro put his foot down and said, basically, if you want to be my captain, you can do that. He said, how can we possibly trust somebody who decides to leave the crew on a whim? And how can we follow a captain who is not confident in the decisions that he is making? And so this idea of Usopp leaving the crew on a whim, basically an incorrect impulse, is very pervasive in the community, and for good reason, right? As every one of us read or watched Enies Lobby and Water 7 for the first time, Usopp's motivations didn't make any sense. Yes, we all love the Going Merry. It's a great ship. We have fond memories, but it is dying. It cannot perform the essential task that it needs to for the crew. It won't be able to sail to the next island. Luffy is left with no choice. It's not a choice that he wants to make. He has no other one. Usopp is being unreasonable. This is what everybody thinks, because that was precisely what Oda wanted us to think at the time. But upon reread and noting particular details, it changes my view of this whole argument fundamentally. So I want to talk about this and also compare this to the other Straw Hats which left the crew, Sanji and Robin mainly, and a little bit about Nami. But before we get into it, I want to let you guys know about Revujo's Kickstarter. Revujo teamed up with a author named Sawyer Green, and together they wrote a child's story called NOSFERATU. Illustrations, of course, by Revujo. There's a Kickstarter for that, and we would both appreciate it immensely if you supported that. It would mean the world to them. I think that it's been discussed at length that Sanji and Whole Cake Island, his reasons for leaving the crew, the story behind it, is a combination of both Robin and Usopp's stories from Enies Lobby and Water 7. I don't think that we're going to discuss this too much, but I also just want to point out that it also shares similarities with Nami leaving the crew at the very beginning of the story. So pretty much any time a crew member left, it's all bundled up into one moment with Sanji. But there's some debate as to which Straw Hat Sanji is more similar to. And the opinion that I find most is that Sanji is more similar to Robin rather than Usopp. But I think that it's more 50-50 than a lot of people realize. Robin is being pursued by a great force in the One Piece world that she does not think that the Straw Hats can defeat, something that she feels personally responsible for. Sanji is pursued by the Big Mom Pirates and the Vinsmoke, a force that he probably doesn't think that the Straw Hats can deal with or can deal with at the moment, and he feels personally responsible for putting the Straw Hats in that danger. They both came to the same conclusion about how to deal with this problem. Robin a little bit quicker than Sanji. Don't fight them. Don't let the Straw Hat crew involve themselves in a fight with them. Sacrifice yourself to protect them. But then Robin discovers, and Sanji is reminded, that no matter how hard they try to leave the crew or distance themselves from Luffy, Luffy will not accept that until he feels like he understands why they left. Until they tell him honestly what it is that they really want. They have to prove that they're not lying. I think that these comparisons between Sanji and Robin are well known. But the only real comparison that I see people commonly make about Sanji and Usopp is that Usopp fought Luffy. They had a duel, and so did Sanji. But it's actually far more than that. If you guys will remember back to very near the very beginning of Water 7, the whole story focused around the Strats' money. They had collected money from selling gold in Skypiea. They had billions of berries which they intended to use to help fix the Going Merry. And Usopp was in possession of 2 of these briefcases for a total of 200 million berries. And then the Frankie family beat him up and took them. It's described in detail that Usopp felt a very personal responsibility for this, and ultimately what he blamed was his own weakness. It was an insecurity within his character. If he had been stronger, it wouldn't have happened. If he had been stronger, he would have been able to protect the briefcases, thereby fixing the Merry. So Usopp thought that they were losing a crew member. The Merry Go is a crew member. Thought that they were losing a crew member because of his weakness. In this way, Sanji is more similar to Usopp than Robin. Robin has an insecurity, I suppose, but that insecurity is based on history. She is a wanted woman with powerful factions that are pursuing her. Even as one is dealt with, another will arrive, and we're currently dealing with that where we are in the story right now. She may feel personally responsible for this, but none of this is a real flaw in her character. The issue at its heart is very simply, can the Strats deal with this powerful enemy and the others that will follow? Sanji has the same story, but it's layered with something else. There's a personal attachment, a specific person for which he's actually fighting for, he's leaving the crew for. In this case, it was Zeph, which is similar to Usopp, who was fighting for the Going Merry. It's more than simply protecting the crew in general. And the reason that they go so hard in protecting these people is rooted in their insecurity. Usopp saw himself as a failure similar to the Going Merry. So when the Strats cast aside the Going Merry, Usopp projected it onto himself, and we'll talk about this in more detail with the actual dialogue from the story. But the same here is true of Sanji. Sanji believes that he will never be able to repay his debt to Zeph, and this demonstrates itself in the Baratie arc as he struggles to actually leave, despite that being what both he and Zeph wanted. This comes from Sanji's issues with his own self-worth. And this extends throughout the story, but really rears its head in Whole Cake Island, where he feels like his burdens are not worthy of the Strats' time. Like, this is an important point of clarification. Robin's problem was the presence of the world government. She did not think that the Strats could defeat them. But with Sanji, it's far more ambiguous. Does Sanji think that the Strats can defeat Big Mom? Well, if he thinks that they can defeat Kaido, of course it's possible that they can defeat Big Mom. Of course, they would need to devote everyone. They would need to gather their forces. It would need to become a big deal. And that's the difference. Sanji didn't want his problems to be a big deal. He didn't want his problems to distract the crew from their current objective and their current friends, right? Momonosuke and Kinemon the samurai, everything was lined up, and Sanji simply felt like his problems mattered less. This is speculation, but I don't think that Sanji chose to leave Zou before Luffy arrived because this was such an urgent, pressing matter. If he wanted to, he could delay Capone Beige and Peckham's. They could fight them and then later have them take him to Whole Cake Island. He could have waited for Luffy, but he didn't want to wait for Luffy because he knew if he did, Luffy would try to help him and wouldn't take no for an answer. But Sanji didn't want help. So initially, when going to Whole Cake Island, Sanji intended to fight his family, tell them he's not getting married, and then leave. The only prerequisite, as far as he knew at the time, was that he had to attend the tea party, because if he didn't attend the tea party, then Big Mom would be very mad. So he's going to attend the tea party, not get married, tell his family to F off, and then leave. He chose this fight himself. Very similar to how after the briefcases were stolen from Usopp, he chose to fight the Frankie family himself. And different from Robin, who never had any intention of fighting the world government. And they were both deluded. Usopp was deluded that he would be strong enough to be able to fight this faction. Sanji was deluded that he was going to be able to go into Big Mom's territory, attend the wedding, not get married, and then expect for the conflict to resolve itself miraculously, despite him denying multiple people what they wanted. In the pursuits of these fights, Usopp was physically destroyed, and I think that Sanji was emotionally destroyed. It was a fight that they couldn't win alone. For the sake of completeness, right, I just want to make sure that we're on the same page, because this tends to be a splitting hairs subject, but we can talk about Nami as she left the crew before Arlong Park. That whole story was about Nami sharing the burden, what she wouldn't do with the village and she wouldn't do with the Straw Hats. She wanted to both protect and save her family and the other villagers, and she felt like the only way that she could do that was bear the brunt of it herself. You can argue this as a similarity between everybody who left the crew, that they wanted to deal with their problem themselves to protect someone or the crew itself. But I think that you understand as you continue the story, there's no intrinsic insecurity here. There's no deep-rooted issues with Nami's personality. Her views on this subject were very relevant to these specific circumstances. The same is true with Robin. Robin had to admit that she wanted to live, but I think that you go throughout the story, Robin is not suicidal, right? That is not an inherent character flaw. She became that way because of these specific circumstances. But with Usopp and Sanji both, you're dealing with things that are pervasive throughout the story, insecurities that they have that they carry with them in every case. Throughout essentially the entirety of the pre-time skip, Usopp wonders whether he is too weak. He admits this. Sanji at the same time, even after they leave the Baratie, struggles with his self-worth. He struggles to see his own value, to be able to pursue his own interests, to have wants that can at some point infringe upon what other people want, or what he thinks other people want. An example of this being that Zeff cares more about the Baratie than Sanji himself, which tends to be a baseline thing that Sanji tends to believe in general. Other things matter more than he does. Same thing here in Whole Cake Island. Sanji thinks that the Straw Hats and everyone else wants to go to Wano rather than help him. He's deeply delusional. And we finally see some significant growth regarding this in Wano. Sanji is a strong member of the crew. There's lots of expectations about what he should do. He should defeat the opponent before him, but he couldn't defeat Black Maria. So he allowed Robin to help him. He, and to a large extent the community itself, had to swallow their pride. Even after Whole Cake Island, Sanji is still struggling to grow. And this aspect of swallowing one's pride is also very relevant to Usopp. In fact, the title of the chapter in which Usopp returns. I look at Usopp and Sanji as direct foils. They're not the same. They're contrasted in very specific ways. Sanji is strong, and that carries expectation that he defeats whoever it is that the Strats need him to defeat. Usopp is very weak, and the expectation for him is to do whatever it is that you can. Usopp's story is a constant story of success. His survival is a success. Sanji's story is a constant story of failure, which relates all the way back to his childhood when he was a member of the Vinsmoke family and was viewed as a failure. Because Sanji is a very capable person who cannot do some things, and Usopp is a mostly incapable person who can do some things. Usopp's pride, I think, revolves around his insecurity that he belongs. Despite his success, it's a constant question. Whereas Sanji's pride directly relates to the things that he believes that he should be able to do. These two differences come together beautifully in both thinking that they can't do enough. Deep down, Usopp wants to be valued, and deep down, Sanji wants to be devalued. And this is their source of conflict and the very reasons why they left the crew. Usopp does not leave the crew unless he believes that Luffy does not need him and does not want him. Sanji is capable of leaving the crew and attacking Luffy because he has convinced himself that Luffy does not need him and should not want him. Once you're a member of the crew, a general rule that I think that the crew operates based on, that they follow, is that once a crew member has decided their task in whatever event, it is important for the other members of the crew to trust them to accomplish this task. And if somebody has a task that they cannot perform, they need to be honest about it, and if necessary, ask for help or find something new. Find the thing that they can do that will help the Straw Hats succeed, or do the thing that they must for the Straw Hats to succeed. Some of these are very consistent and obvious. Luffy always fights the boss. Zoro always fights the second in command. Others can be more nuanced, more niche, or change depending on the circumstance. Like for instance with Sanji. Sometimes Sanji needs to be Mr. Prince. Sometimes Sanji needs to be the number 3 fighter. In Whole Cake Island, Sanji needed to be the world's greatest chef. Like there's not, you know this, there's not no definitive set of rules. I kind of equate it to playing a game where you have a cast of characters, each with different attributes. You figure out how to use them best. And also against your opponent. This happens naturally in the story of One Piece with the Straw Hat Pirates because everyone has unique skills that may become relevant at any given point in time. But in simplest terms, the idea always is to just win. However it is that it is possible to do so, utilize the pieces on the board available to make that happen. But of course, it's not always that simple, right? Yes, there might be a fight that might be advantageous or not for a Straw Hat. Sometimes, and I think not sometimes, really often, the way that the Straw Hats win is not necessarily by strategy, but by effort and belief. Willpower. It's basically a hack of the game. There are many examples of this, but just to give you one so that you know what I'm talking about, Zoro versus Mr. One, right? Mr. One was the perfect counter for Zoro at the time that they fought in terms of strategy, like the board game based on the pieces that you know and what they can do. Mr. One just wins. He's made of steel and Zoro cannot cut steel. But Zoro ultimately defeats Mr. One because he acquires this skill. He acquires the skill, he grows in his time of need. And the interesting thing about this is that we can't know this for certain, but I think that often it's implied that without these moments of growth, Straw Hats taking on challenges that it doesn't seem likely or probable or sane for them to attempt, if they don't overcome these things and grow, then they don't make it this far. Faith and belief plays an integral role, not only in the story of One Piece, but in how the Straw Hats organize themselves and carry on from island to island, from battle to battle. Essentially, they don't play this board game very strategically. Believing in the impossible is fundamental to being a Straw Hat. Taking on challenges, no matter how insane they appear to be, has created what we see now. So obviously this applies generally to the Straw Hat crew as one entity, but it also applies individually to each member. I think Luffy verbalized this at the end of Whole Cake Island, but of course it is throughout the story. He's relying on his crewmates to do what it is that they say that they're going to do. Even if somewhere deep down inside, Luffy or anyone else has doubts, if the crew member says that they are going to do something, and they mean it, or if there is a thing that they must do, then it is the crew's job and every individual member of the crew's job to believe in them. Always. So this was precisely the point of the interaction of Jinbei and Luffy at the end of Whole Cake Island. Jinbei said that he was going to save his crew and then meet back with the Straw Hats in Wano. He said this, he meant it. It's very clear when you read the scene that Luffy is not entirely sure how such a thing is impossible. Deep down inside, or even less than that, Luffy is or has doubts. But it is his job to believe that Jinbei will accomplish this task. So he does, and then Jinbei later rewards him, which can be seen as possibly a true initiation into the Straw Hat crew, proving that Jinbei is worthy. One of the more nuanced things within the story of One Piece is how Luffy is a captain, or Luffy's leadership strategy. Oda beautifully textualizes this in Arlong Park. Luffy is fighting Arlong, and Arlong says, "Humans are a stupid, weak, foolish species. You sink like rocks in the ocean. What can you do?" And Luffy responds, "Maybe I can't do anything, but I have friends who will rescue me." Then he picks up some swords, and Sanji's like, does he even know how to use a sword? And he starts swinging it stupidly at Arlong, who's like, what the hell is this? Arlong deals with the sword pretty easily, but ultimately smashes Arlong's teeth, and Luffy says this: "I don't know how to use a sword. I don't know how to navigate either. I can't cook, and I can't tell lies. I know I can't live without help from a lot of people." And Arlong laughs. "What a clever boy you are to admit your own helplessness. What a burden it must be for your crew to have such an idiot for a captain. I don't know why they fight so desperately to save you. You lack the slightest shred of dignity or ability. What gives you the right to be the captain of a ship? Just what can you do?" And Luffy says, "I can beat you." This conversation is the first big, real exposition dump about who Luffy is as a captain and why he's deserving of being a captain, what his great skill is. I think that people in the community ask this question as well, like, what does Luffy do as a captain? Why is he deserving of being a captain? Maybe you can ask, what can Luffy do besides defeating the enemy boss? And the answer to this, in the absolute vast majority of cases, is that Luffy can understand what he can or can't do. Simultaneously, he understands what his crew can or can't do. This is Luffy's leadership, the qualities that he has that he gives to the crew itself that are essential. He needs to be able to read right from wrong, truth from lies, evaluate himself and the crew, know when he knows or when he does not, and who he should trust. Anytime that Luffy misjudges, he has failed the crew and not performed his duties as captain. There's, I think, a large faction of One Piece fans who think that Zoro might make for a better captain for the Straw Hat crew because, he's going to be the world's strongest swordsman. Most likely it's around the same level as Luffy as Pirate King, close enough. Individually, he's strong enough. He's also quite rational, right? Perhaps would make smarter decisions than Luffy. But it's this which Luffy has that Zoro lacks more than anything. I want you to try and keep all of this in mind because it's all going to become relevant. So we've established that Usopp's insecurity is that he is weak. He knows that he is weak and he questions what it is that he can do. At the same time, he desires to be valued. This relates to his long-standing dream of becoming a great pirate of the sea. A person of great renown and fame and ability. That's what Usopp strives for. People such as the giants who give him this impression are people he admires. But I think that Usopp walks this very thin tightrope in that he needs, throughout the story, all these successes, all these victories that he has in whatever small or large way. Those are things that he needs. If he had failed like Sanji multiple times throughout the story, then I don't think that Usopp would have remained a Straw Hat. Usopp exists in the state where he constantly has to grow. He constantly has to meet the bar, because otherwise he would not be able to do anything for anyone. He would serve no purpose on the crew. He is not a strong fighter, a fighter that the Strats tend to rely upon. He doesn't serve some sort of integral role on the ship. He's not a shipwright, which Luffy emphasizes in Water 7. He's not a doctor, he's not a cook, he's not a navigator. He is low-key a very solid inventor, and tends to be a jack-of-all-trades, master of none that can do some things poorly. But as a sniper, his aim always has to be true. If he misses, there is no point for him to be there. So it's no coincidence that Usopp takes defeat and takes failure very hard. And I think that a part of this really helps Usopp push past his limits in almost every arc. He finds the thing that he can do, or that he thinks that the crew needs him to do, or that they ask him to do, and must do it or there is no reason to be there. So when he lost the briefcase and the money was stolen, the money that was supposed to fix the merry-go, Usopp did what he always does. When he believes something to have been or is his task, he gave it his all. And the result of this was disastrous failure. Usopp is nearly dead. The crew have to come save him. They attempt to cover up his mistake. However, the money is gone. At the same time this is taking place, we see that the shipwrights have visited the Going Merry and informed the crew, with the exception of Usopp, that the merry-go will not be able to sail to the next island. It is broken beyond their ability to fix. they'll have to get a new ship. And Luffy's immediate response was anger and doubt. He told them that they didn't know what they were talking about. But after a day or so of thinking on it, Luffy finally decided that they would get a new ship. Usopp still doesn't know. And then we have chapter 331, which I'm basically going to read the entire chapter to you while notating some of my observations based on the discussion so far. Usopp begins by apologizing to the entire crew for having lost the money and making it very clear that he blames himself. He then asks them, will 100 million berries be enough to fix the merry-go? And Luffy, with a totally normal, unconcerned face, says, no worries Usopp, I've decided to switch ships. We owe a lot to Merry-Go, but this is as far as she'll sail. So I've been looking at some ships to replace her. If we have 100 million, we can get one that's even bigger, though it'll have to be secondhand. This catches Usopp totally off guard, for justifiable reasons. Important context that I haven't yet shared, but Usopp saw the Going Merry spirit, its Klaboutermon, in Skypiea. He was the only one to do so. Usopp's personal connection with the ship seemed to be greater than everybody else, and this led to Usopp essentially being the expert on the ship. The other Straw Hats, including Luffy, valued the ship, they appreciated it, but I don't think that they quite understood that the ship was a living member of their crew, a literal Nakama, not a lesser than Nakama. Thereby, it was bound by the unspoken rules of the crew. And until it developed its own voice, which it eventually did, Usopp was its voice. And he was the only person who actually treated the Going Merry as a Nakama, which was the right thing to do. The correct stance to hold. Imagine for a moment that a member of the Straw Hat Pirates came down with some sort of chronic illness where some doctor somewhere told them that this crew member would not make it to the next island. Perhaps they had some sort of plan set in motion. You can imagine like the plan to take down Kaido. They're relying on this crew member to perform their function in the new island, but somebody tells them, some sort of expert, right? Expert, quote unquote, that this crew member will not survive. In this case, what do you think happens? Well, the Straw Hats will probably believe in the impossible. This expert, or so-called expert, isn't much of an expert because they know that crew member better than that doctor ever could. Luffy knows what they can or can't do. Luffy believes in them. What is always most important is what they want. The only way that crew member is not going to the next island and is not going to be relied upon is if they voluntarily decide that they can't continue the adventure, that they no longer want to. But the Merry is in a strange situation where it can't properly communicate. However, I believe that Usopp knows best, that Usopp is its voice, and all the events afterwards all validate him. We finally learn what the Going Merry wants. The Going Merry wants to travel to the next island, and it did. The Going Merry was a Nakama, it was a Straw Hat from before Enies Lobby. But Enies Lobby was the moment that it established this as fact. Not just because it had a visible appearance, not just because it had an audible voice, not just because it moved the ship. In Enies Lobby, the Going Merry did the impossible. When everybody told it things that it could not do, it did them. And when its task was complete, it fell apart. But you'll notice something very interesting about this example. It's normal for characters in the world of One Piece to doubt the Straw Hats. But usually Luffy tends to be a believer. But in this case, he was not. When Nami left the crew in Arlong Park, Luffy wanted to know why. And then he wanted her to admit the truth. In Water 7, when Robin left the crew, Luffy wanted to know why. He wanted the truth. When Sanji left the crew in Whole Cake Island, Luffy wanted to know why. And then he wanted the truth. Luffy fought in his own way for all of them. He always had the intention of bringing them back, or at the least discovering what it is that they truly wanted. He would never abandon them. But Usopp and the Going Merry were never given this level of respect. I believe that it was for two different reasons in which Luffy was wrong in both. This is speculation, but I like it, so I'm going to share it. I kind of wonder whether Luffy was covering up his sadness about the Going Merry. When he talks to Usopp and tells him about picking a new ship, he has this bright and cheerful face. And I think that it's fair to speculate that this was a mask. Luffy was hurt far more than he wanted to show. Although when the Going Merry later reveals itself as being a true Nakama, it is clear that this has surprised Luffy, that he has learned something and now sees the Going Merry in a different way. Even from before Water 7, Luffy had a lot of respect for the ship, and he did personify it as a crewmate. A part of me wonders whether or not Luffy could accept losing a crewmate, so he almost had to believe that the ship was just a ship. So while justifiable and understandable, this is nothing more than self-delusion, and it is without question the greatest disrespect that Luffy has ever shown to any crewmate ever. Imagine Luffy telling any other crewmate that he has retired them and no longer believes in them, without even attempting to understand what they want, and then boasting in their presence that he can't wait to find their replacement. I kinda think you can understand here why Usopp would be mad, and then fear for himself. It's either this, or he really didn't understand that the Going Merry was an actual crewmate. In this case, he deferred to the wrong expertise. Usopp was the expert, the crew was the expert. They understood the Going Merry most, not the shipwrights. Although understandable, it is Luffy's job to figure out who to trust and believe. This is a failure of his role as a captain, either as a captain or as a person. And this is made explicitly clear when the ship that he no longer believed in saved all of their lives. But with Usopp, it's slightly different, although there is a theme that is similar. As we've already established, Luffy understands that there's many things that he can't do, and he must rely upon his friends. He must ask his friends for help. This is as much a rule for Luffy as it is for every member of the crew. And Usopp offered that help by telling Luffy what it is that he needed to hear, or he should have needed to hear. We are just about to run through the entire chapter, 331, in which we can count all of Usopp's W's. But he was trying to give Luffy the truth, and in retrospect it really did not appear as if Luffy wanted to hear that. Which, if the theory about the Going Merry is true, that Luffy couldn't accept the Going Merry as a crewmate because that would be a failure, to be a ship was more palatable for Luffy. Then in this respect, he also didn't want the truth. It's a moment where Luffy did not demonstrate integrity. And then despite Usopp's own insecurities, you can understand how Usopp lost respect. And it was this beyond anything else that Luffy seemed to understand. And really the main difference between Usopp leaving the crew and everybody else. It was in this instance that Luffy definitely should have apologized, but he never did. Not ever. And the saddest thing about all of this is that as the Going Merry died, it revealed its insecurity, its regret, one and the same as Usopp. It said, "I'm sorry. I wanted to carry you even farther. I'm sorry. I wanted to have adventures with you forever. But Luffy cuts it off before it has a chance to say. But we all know what it is. But I was too weak. Usopp fought for this ship, not only because he loved it, but because he understood it. He, more than anybody else, could be its champion. And he, more than anybody else, was threatened by Luffy's moment of weakness, or his moment of ignorance." But enough stalling, let's read the rest of chapter 331 so that I can forever change your interpretation of how this argument went. Hold it, you can stop joking around now. So, we don't have enough money to repair, all because I got the 200 million stolen? There isn't enough, is that it? And Luffy's like, look, that's not it. And then they both get mad. Usopp says, then explain, don't hold anything back. And Luffy says, I'm not holding back, which I think might have been Luffy's second L. Note here that Usopp really wanted Luffy to explain. He's baffled, but gives Luffy that respect. So Luffy continues, getting that money stolen has nothing to do with this. Usopp then says, then why'd you bring up the idiotic idea of changing ships? Meanwhile, the crew start to get involved trying to settle them down because they are already yelling. I think that through the context of over 1,000 chapters of One Piece, you can understand that Luffy is far more irritable than normal in this circumstance. He seems rattled. Luffy typically doesn't mind being called an idiot, but in this instance, he does. It really doesn't appear as if he wants this conversation with Usopp at all. This is again strange because throughout the course of 1,000 chapters, there are many examples of Straw Hats disagreeing with Luffy, offering advice or criticizing him. But this one got under his skin. Luffy then explains, the merry-go can't be repaired any further. She just can't be fixed. I wouldn't be telling you this if there was any other way, but it's our ship, the ship we're on right now. Yeah, this ship which is about to sink. Here's Luffy's third L. This ship, which was about to sink, weathered Aqua Laguna, traveled to the next island, and saved all of their lives. This is almost 2 L's wrapped in one because Luffy says the ship can't be fixed. Despite it being a central tenet of the Straw Hat crew, to do the impossible always, believe in the impossible always. But here Luffy chooses not to. Usopp then asks, what are you saying, Luffy? Luffy says it's true, that's what they said at the shipbuilding center. They said she won't even make it to the next island. I'll just call this L number 6. Usopp then replies, oh, I see, she won't make it, huh? A bunch of guys you've never met before convinced you of that, and you just came back here? A bunch of supposedly first-rate shipwrights told you she's had it? The ship we journeyed on together, over every wave in every battle, this venerable mate that accompanied us through it all? And you're not gonna lift a finger? You're just going to abandon her in a place like this? Is that all this ship means to you? All of this is a huge W, by the way. And while Luffy never directly admits this to Usopp, he does admit this to the Going Merry as it dies. They chose to give it a proper funeral. They treated it like a crew member, which Luffy was not doing at this time. Luffy then goes on to say, well then, you're the expert? Which Usopp is, L number 7. This crew doesn't have a carpenter. That's why we went to those guys to check the ship. Usopp is still mad, so forget it. Don't bother asking people like them. I'll fix her up like I always have. That's how we've done it so far, right? Although it's fair to ask a shipwright about a ship, typically the crew has more faith in other crew members. If someone, for instance, told him that Usopp was too weak to be a member of the pirate crew's crew, Luffy would not take that seriously, even though that is an incredibly realistic take. The truth is that Usopp was the expert because he understood the Merry's soul. Again here, the other Straw Hats try to interject and stop this fight. Luffy eventually yells, you're not a ship's carpenter, Usopp, which is true. And Usopp immediately admits to this truth. Yeah, that's true, so what? Just remember this, they call themselves specialists, but to them it's just someone else's ship. They'll write it off without a second thought. Well, I just don't trust them. It's our ship, and it's up to us to protect it. That's the lesson here, which is true. And in fact, Luffy reiterates this same lesson at the conclusion of Enies Lobby when we have the Going Merry's funeral. So it was in fact the lesson here. I will never turn my back on this ship, which is what's right as a fellow crew member. Are you all crazy? You got taken in by a bunch of big-time shipwrights just because they talk smart? The Luffy I know would see through their sales pitch and have faith in the merry-go's strength, which is essentially what we've been talking about through this entire video. But instead you've gotten all old and made an idiotic decision like that. How can you call yourself the ship's captain? Which is a fair criticism. I misjudged you, Luffy, which is quite honest, although a little bit too heated. But I think that you have to admit that nobody else seemed willing to fight for the Merry in this instant. It was Usopp or nobody. So heated or not, he's doing the right thing. Nami then tries to interject in the fight and prevent this from going further, but Luffy stops her. Be quiet, Nami, I've made my decision. Nothing you say will change my mind. Luffy is rejecting help. We're gonna change ships. We will part with the merry-go here. Not likely, I won't allow it. I think here you can really tell that this is a battle for supremacy. This is Usopp saying that I'm going to be a better captain than you. And you can see the problems with this in general. But can you really expect Usopp to abandon his heart, abandon his empathy, and abandon the Going Merry there on the shoreline? This whole scene is so very weird, because it's the one time where Luffy is definitely wrong, but doesn't know it. Some will say, well, the Going Merry was actually dying, and it did actually die, therefore Luffy was right, but that's not how the strats work. If Luffy did this throughout the story, they would have failed. Just as they would have failed in this arc if the Going Merry hadn't saved them. I agree that it's important that the crew not challenge Luffy for leadership in certain circumstances, but you also want Luffy to just be right. What choice did Usopp have? And we'll discuss the hypocrisy with Zoro afterwards. But he does the same thing, but he gets a pass. Again, the other crew members are trying to interject in the fight. Luffy continues to ignore them, thereby proving Usopp right about failing as a captain. Usopp then continues, now listen Luffy, not everyone is able to be optimistic like you and always look forward. I can't turn my back on an injured comrade and go back out to sea. This is the one major area where Usopp is wrong, and he admits this later. He calls the Going Merry injured. She's not injured. But it doesn't refute all of his other points that Luffy should have treated the ship differently. They actually could have resolved this conflict had that been the case. Had Luffy perhaps told Usopp and the crew the truth. Sound familiar? Luffy then yells, "Shut up! You can't compare a ship to a human being," which is quite possibly the most catastrophic L out of all of this. Usopp then yells back, "They're the same. Merry has the inner strength to keep on living," which is equally a top tier W. But knowing you, you're already excited about the next ship. You were just pretending to care about the Merry. Here, Usopp is wrong. However, Luffy is doing everything in his power in order to convince him that he is right, which is why Usopp is mad. Luffy then gets really angry and attacks Usopp. Cut the crap, don't think you're the only one taking this hard. Everyone on this ship feels the same way. Which is a small L because it's very clear that they don't feel the same way as Usopp. Usopp is right. And so he says, then there's no way you would abandon her. Which is a solid argument while being attacked. Luffy then says, alright then, if you don't like my way of doing things, you can just take this opportunity to... And then Sanji kicks Luffy. Before he has the opportunity to suggest that Usopp leave the crew, which is another catastrophic L. When confronted with the truth, it seems as though Luffy would rather kick the crewmate out, which is some shocking mental weakness. But as I said, Sanji kicks Luffy, stopping this from happening. He says, "You idiot! Luffy, what were you about to say? Cool down, or you'll end up saying things you'll regret." And Luffy says, oh sorry, I didn't mean it. Usopp interjects, "No, it's alright, Luffy. That's probably how you really feel." And I think you have to wonder whether or not that's true. Why was that thought in his brain? At this point, they'd been arguing for approximately 30 seconds. Luffy has rejected all attempts from help from anybody. And this quickly spirals to Usopp should leave. I know that from reading the story, this shouldn't be the case. But in this moment, I do kind of think that Luffy was about to suggest how he really felt. Wrongly, of course, but honestly. If you want to criticize me as a captain or as a person, justifiably, it would be better if you left. At the very least, if this suggestion is not made, then I think that it is doubtful that Usopp leaves the crew. So Usopp leaving was always Luffy's fault. Usopp was simply defending a Nakama. He stands on the high ground. In this case, his insecurity is actually not at fault. This is not selfish. In fact, it's Usopp's strength and the reason why he captures all these W's. He simply understands the Going Merry best. And he also understands Luffy's failure best. But yet for some reason, only Usopp has to apologize. For just spitting facts constantly. And attempting to stop Luffy from continuing to spew the greatest disrespect he ever has to anybody worthy in the entire story. But then the chapter after this shortly ends with some minor W's again for Usopp, as he points out that Luffy is abandoning a crewmate. He has a minor L in suggesting that Luffy would also abandon himself, but at the same time, Luffy kind of suggested it. There seems to be circumstances in which Luffy will abandon crewmates. I haven't mentioned Whiskey Pink and Verse Zoro, but that situation is also kind of relevant for criticism of Luffy. If you actually look real hard, Luffy isn't always right. And this one was very weird because at the time that we all read and watched it, we were like, oh man, Luffy's just schooling Usopp. But yeah, no. The question at the heart of this, although simple, is I think an important question in general. Should the crew have respect for Luffy? Should they follow Luffy if he is not right? Should they put aside their beliefs for him? And I think the answer is no. But anyway, my assumption going into this video is that I was going to say something pretty outlandish, and that the majority of you are, at the very least, going to have extreme skepticism. But at this point in the video, I hope that you understand what I'm saying. And hopefully it doesn't seem quite so absurd. So I think that there should be some point to this video, aside from, okay, I made an argument, maybe Luffy should have apologized, maybe not. Is this some oversight on Oda? Does this serve some role in the story? Like, what can we conclude from this? So I think to address this, first we have to ask the question, why did Usopp have to apologize, but Luffy did not? And my answer to this comes from Usopp's perspective. I think that all Usopp wanted, his entire argument, was for Luffy to value the going merry. Had Luffy done that from the start, had Luffy made it clear to Usopp how much he cared, if Luffy had made it clear to Usopp that the Merry was a Nakama, and if they gave it the right send-off, I don't think that Usopp would have fought as hard. We've speculated this already in this video, and it will never, ever be proven, I don't think. But I truly feel in my heart that Luffy lied. To Usopp, to the crew, but most importantly, to himself. When the shipwrights first tell Luffy that the going merry can't be fixed, Luffy reacted very similarly to Usopp. It was then that you could tell that Luffy understood Usopp's arguments, even if he later did his best to argue against them. And it's not until later that he puts on a stone face. There's actually a really interesting line from Zoro that I'm going to apply in a way that I don't think that you would expect, but is probably relevant. Zoro tells Luffy after Usopp leaves the crew, he says, "That's the burden of being a captain. Don't doubt yourself. If you start becoming unsure, who can we have faith in?" Here Zoro is commenting on Luffy's decision to switch ships and fight Usopp. Don't become unsure. Then who can we have faith in? What's interesting about this line, even though this doesn't seem to be Zoro's intention, is when Luffy first hears that the going merry can't be fixed, he says this, "No, I don't intend to change ships. Our ship is the going merry. If we make some repairs, she'll be able to keep sailing for a long time. She'll be fine. She sailed smoothly today, and now suddenly you're telling me she's not seaworthy? Like I would believe you. You only think that because you don't know what a stubborn ship she is." Sounds familiar, yeah? This was Luffy's gut reaction to hearing the news. And it's precisely the same reaction that Usopp had. And it is precisely the right reaction, which was later justified at the end of the arc. I want you to note how drastically Luffy's opinion changed. He went from saying, you only think that because you don't know what a stubborn ship she is. He personifies the ship. He gives it life and substance. To later, when speaking with Usopp, he says you can't treat a ship as if it is a person. The level of flip-flopping here is astronomical. In fact, he flip-flopped in the wrong direction. Luffy says this, and then he thinks it over for about a day. And then he changes his mind. This is an example of him being unsure of himself. There was Luffy's natural reaction, and then doubt, and then a change in course. To reiterate, Zoro says, if you begin to doubt yourself, if you become unsure, who can we have faith in? And it's interesting here because it appears as though Luffy's change in opinion, his change in his decision, made Usopp lose faith in him. Usopp calls it out in like a brutally honest way. This isn't you. I've misjudged you. Because Luffy is literally acting unlike himself. He is being unsure. And it caused Usopp to lose faith. We've obviously talked about this a little bit, but when you put it like this, it's like the roles are totally reversed, right? When Straw Hats, other Straw Hats aside from Usopp, leave the crew, right? It's always Luffy that tries to help them, that tries to get the truth out of them. They are acting unlike themselves. It makes Luffy question their motives, or if he understands. So here, Usopp is actually performing Luffy's role, although I think that overall, he's doing it poorly. Which is remarkably fitting for Usopp as a character, jack of all trades, master of none. Like in a situation the same as this, but Usopp is the captain, what he should have done is not left the crew. What does Luffy often do, right, when Sanji isn't going to admit the truth? Fine, I sit right here, I'll wait for you to return with food. He did the same thing with Nami in Arlong Park. You want me to go? Alright, well I'm taking a nap. I'm not going anywhere. Usopp didn't, but that's probably what he needed to do. And we can see that there's other instances in which, Luffy is not as invulnerable as he may appear to be throughout the story. With Ace's death, for instance, it nearly broke him. You could perhaps see this then as a midway point of Luffy learning to accept that death is part of the journey. But as Usopp is performing the role of Luffy and Luffy is performing the role of somebody who's left the crew, you'll know that in all of these other instances in which Nakama left, Luffy never required them to apologize. So similar to this, I don't think that Usopp ever required an apology from Luffy. He just wanted Luffy to be himself. And once he was, things were set back the way that they should be. So the other half of this question, why did Usopp have to apologize? I think that the answer to this is even more simple. Zoro. Usopp had to apologize because Zoro did not understand the fight that was taking place. This is possibly another blasphemous thing that I'm saying in this video that a lot of people are going to knee-jerk and hate immediately, because Zoro is God and is right always. But this is definitely not true, and you see this evidence throughout the story. In every example of a Straw Hat leaving the crew, Zoro is always wrong. Always. When Nami left the crew in Arlong Park, she fake-killed Usopp, and the crew is asking, this can't be real, and Luffy's just standing there, I don't believe this. And Zoro, the fool, actually tried to attack her. People don't remember this. The only reason that Zoro did not cut her is because Sanji intervened. If Luffy's great power is to understand someone's nature, understand their pain, and be able to respond in the right way, and Usopp's somewhere in the middle where he has some ability to do this but is just not as good as Luffy, Zoro is on the complete opposite side of the spectrum. Zoro's judgment of situations like this is just egregiously bad. We can go to when Robin joined the crew. Luffy allowed Robin to join the crew because clearly he understood something about her from the moment that he met her. And as she joins the crew, who's the main person who doubts him and who continues to doubt him for an extended period of time? Zoro. All the way through Skypiea, Zoro's wondering about her, he doesn't trust her. After the point in time that literally every other crewmate had accepted her. This demonstrates, I think, quite clearly that Zoro is not a great judge of character or intention. And again, we see this with Sanji and Zoe in Whole Cake Island. Sanji left, and Luffy did the correct thing, right? As a member of the Straw Hats, he understood there was something weird going on with Sanji, so he needed to go find them because that's what the Straw Hats do. And the only person who put up a fuss about this was Zoro. Zoro is consistently wrong, and I think that he was wrong with Usopp as well. But here's where it gets complicated. I think the great lesson for Luffy after this arc was essentially to listen to his crewmates. Allow them to help him. There was a direct conflict and then consequence. Ultimately, Luffy lost Usopp's faith, and by the conclusion of the arc, Usopp was proven right. And the one who had their perspective changed was not Usopp, it was Luffy. And so immediately after this takes place and there's resolution between Usopp and Luffy, Luffy never required an apology from Usopp. From that point forward, he was like, oh yeah, Usopp's just going to come back and be part of the crew, right? Zoro instigated the same thing again. Luffy, you must do this thing, or I will lose faith in you. Usopp must be forced to apologize if we are to accept him back into the crew, or I will leave the crew. It's the same thing as what Usopp did at the beginning of the arc. Luffy, you must recognize that the going merry is a nakama, or I will lose faith in you. He didn't verbalize it, but that's what happened. So I feel like Luffy learned something from this. And I think that we already know that he values the crew. He knows that every single member is essential. He cannot succeed without them. He mentions this often. So when Zoro puts his foot down and basically states an ultimatum, this must happen or I will leave, he leaves Luffy with no choice. At the same time, Sanji appears to agree with Zoro, and Luffy's lesson with Usopp was that sometimes he can be wrong about these kinds of things. I think Luffy chose to have faith in Zoro's words, even though they were wrong. Like, hypothetical thought experiment here for a moment. Imagine Zoro's not on the crew, right? So Usopp comes back and doesn't ever apologize for what he did. What goes wrong after this? What goes wrong? In what way is the Straw Hats harmed? Do you think that anyone leaves because of this? Do you think that Luffy's credibility is undermined in any way? Do you think that the other shipmates will lose faith in him? No, none of those things will happen. The only person who would be affected by this is Zoro. He lays out all these rules of being a captain, but the only person who it matters is Zoro. Everyone says that Usopp was being selfish, but I would argue that Zoro was, because he was the only person who needed that apology. Because he has it in his mind about how a captain should be, and Luffy is not that captain. He's a different kind of leader, and it works. Zoro says multiple times in Water 7 and Ease Lobby, we're not playing games. We're not playing pirate. And up until the current point in the story, we're not trending in the opposite direction. And Luffy keeps winning. And nobody's questioning whether or not he is worthy of being the captain. His devil fruit literally turns him into a walking cartoon. This is a unique thing about the Straw Hat Pirates. Luffy is not their ruler, he is not their king. They are equals. Luffy's decisions are not law. They are often contradicted. The crew are not his subjects. They are his friends. But let's try to make sure that Zoro is understand. Why did Zoro demand this apology? Yes, hierarchy in the crew, he seems to believe in these sorts of things, but I think more than anything else, we've established, right? Zoro is not a great judge of character. He's not a great judge of intention. He cannot read people's minds like Luffy can. And so the last thing that Zoro knew is that Usopp lost faith in Luffy. I think that Luffy, readers, and everybody else understood that that faith was returned. I think everybody understood this but Zoro. He needed to hear the words come out of Usopp's mouth. And in this, despite everything that I said, Usopp has legitimate reason to apologize. He should have never left the crew, and he should have never implied that he lost faith in Luffy. He should have done what Luffy always did and continued to believe in the circumstances of whatever is going wrong. So he did. But I suppose the final question is, what is the importance of all this? Like, what's the long term? Is there anything that's going to come from it? You guys know my thoughts on this. I've done other videos related to this, but where we are at the story, it's unclear, you know? I feel confident in my interpretation of this scene as it was. But does Oda go back and dig into Luffy, Zoro, and Usopp's character with what we have remaining in the story to create some kind of moment? I don't know. I can speculate ways, but today I do not want to. I think that this topic stands up on its own, and at the very least gives you something to think about. But yeah, man, I really didn't think that this video would end up being an hour, but look, here we are, and it is an hour. It is what it is, I guess. As always, I'm curious as to what you guys think. Leave your thoughts in the comment section below. I want to once again mention Revujo, the guy who does my art for chapter reviews, his Kickstarter for his children's story NOSFERATU, a story written by Sawyer Green, illustrated by Revujo. We'd both be very appreciative if you gave that project some support. But yeah, guys, as always, subscribe, hit the bell if you want to be notified. We're pumping out content, alright? And yeah, guys, whether you like the video or you dislike the video, have a wonderful day.